All right, well, thank you everyone for coming today as we continue our spring semester of the Disentangling Disinformation series. This was a series born last semester as a response to the current political climate, but also as a reflection of societal shifts that have slowly been taking place over the course of decades and have made themselves more apparent of late. Disinformation has become a truth of our times. We live in an era where understanding is not limited to a lack of information, but rather a bombardment of countering narratives. It can be daunting to sift through the barrage of messaging, leaving room for the simple yet harmful decision to ignore it all. There's countless information that shelters what's happening in the world, and disinformation is costing us the ability to stay accurately informed. This series of teach-ins aims to provide tools to navigate the current landscape of media and information and make sense of what we see, what we don't see, and what may be in conflict within us, and kind of informs a continuing practice of self-education. This semester, we're really excited to approach topics like doxing, the power of language, and technology blackouts, just among a few, and we'll share the semester program with you in the chat later on. This series is a combined effort from the Program on Peace and Development at Yale University, MADE, which stands for Mass Atrocities in the Digital Era, which is part of the Genocide Studies program at Yale, and the Department of Social Justice Education at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that those of us based out of Yale are privileged to operate in. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Higpagasit, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples, have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these people and nations and this land. We'd also like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the people of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. My name is Hera Jaffrey. I'm really glad to meet you all, meet some of you again, and be a representative of our sponsoring institutions today. And I'd also like to now very graciously thank our speaker today and give a brief introduction to her and her work, and then pass over the floor for what I'm anticipating is going to be an amazing presentation. Dr. Anna Kruglova is Lecturer of Terrorism Studies at the School of Arts and Media at the University of Salford and an Associate Fellow at the International Center for Counter-Terrorism. Anna has a PhD in International Studies from Queen's University, Belfast. She also holds an MA in International Conflict Studies from King's College, London, and an MSc in Security Studies from UCL. Her research interests focus on terrorist propaganda. She's particularly interested in exploring the role of internet, media, and social media in the recruitment process and radicalization of terrorists. Currently, Anna's interests also expand to the far right, especially in Russia and the post-Soviet space, and the role of disinformation and misinformation in international relations. Thank you so much, Dr. Kruglova, for joining us today and for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Hera, for inviting me. I'm extremely excited to be here and talk about the topic that has really sparked my initial interest in terrorism, radicalization, propaganda, and disinformation. So it's particularly exciting for me to be here and to talk about the topic I'm passionate about. And also, thank you very much to everyone who's attending today. Hopefully, we'll have a very interesting discussion, and I would be able to answer all your questions and satisfy your interest. Let me just share my screen. So today I would like to talk about the topic that, as I've already mentioned, has initially sparked my interest in terrorism and radicalization, which is the use of marketing techniques by terrorist and extremist groups in dissemination of their propaganda, or to be more precise or specific, to influence their audiences in order to push them towards this final step and joining and supporting the group. So I would like to begin by asking I guess, rhetorical question, because I'm going to answer it myself. But what do we actually know about the ways how terrorist groups recruit their members? There is, of course, a bulk of literature on this topic, and we know that terrorist organizations, especially online, tend to benefit from polarized opinions, maybe identify people who already express certain more radical beliefs, and then get connected with them and push them towards this brink where they become not just radical, but also ready to use violence. Terrorist organizations may also play on the feelings of victimization, search for justice, revenge, as if a person felt or experienced discrimination, for example, violation of their rights, some other negative experiences. It may also be a tool that terrorist organization might use in order to connect and encourage a person to, again, adopt their beliefs and eventually join. Terrorist organizations may dehumanize adversaries to, again, encourage a person to accept the fact that using violence against a particular actor is not only possible, but also desirable and necessary. What is more important, and I think what is mostly relevant to our today's discussion, is the idea and the feeling that terrorist organizations are lying to their potential supporters to maybe make them angry about something, about the government, about the society, and eventually push them towards the engagement in violence. While this is obviously true, if terrorist groups only use disinformation and lies in their propaganda, it would have probably be relatively easy to get people disengaged, right? You tell people that terrorist organizations' ideas are wrong, you present the facts, and you think that a person should probably see with their own eyes that the ideology and the ideas that they found attractive are all made up and have nothing to do with the real world. As I'm sure you know and you've seen it, this doesn't happen that often. And despite the fact that, and in the case of ISIS, for example, despite the fact that this group was in particular known for mass atrocities, despite the fact that there were several campaigns aimed at so-called debunking of the ISIS myths, it didn't really encourage that many people to disengage and leave the organization. So probably there is something else that terrorist groups are using in order to connect with their potential target audience and encourage people not just join, but stay regardless of the narratives that are being disseminated by the terrorist group's adversaries. With this thought in mind, there has been an idea expressed by several researchers, and I'm one of them, to compare the ways how terrorist groups recruit and operate online with the ways how brands engage with their potential customers, how brands are promoting their product in order to convince a person who may not have ever thought about buying something from that particular brand that they need this product, they can't live without it, and this particular brand really is able to provide and satisfy the need of the customer. To connect with their audiences, brands are using a variety of techniques. And here I'm going to focus on a few. And the main one, which is believed to be one of the most important in brands' advertisement, is storytelling. And the concept of storytelling derived from the comparison of narrative advertisement and argumentative advertisement and their effects on the customers, which was initially done by Dan Paget and Douglas Allen. So they looked at argumentative advertisement that is based on facts and logic and usually appeals to the rationality of a customer. So you need to travel far away, you need a car. You see a advertisement that explains how you can benefit from buying a car. It is based on the facts that you're going to move quickly, maybe cheaper, more conveniently, etc. However, the authors argued that argumentative advertisement rarely as effective and as efficient as narrative advertisement. Appealing to people's logic and rationality does not produce the same strong effect on customers as narrative advertisement or appealing to customers' emotions. A narrative here means, as you could see on the screen, one or more episodes consisting of actors engaged in actions to achieve goals, and it contains a sequence initiated by some events and actions resulting in outcomes. From this very complicated definition, you can basically say that narrative is a story that describes a certain event or development and has a character that is immersed in the story. So this type of advertisement has a much stronger effect on the audience. And you probably can think about examples yourselves you could see on TV, on internet, probably videos where, I don't know, you have a person who is losing their strength because they are thirsty and they can move and they can achieve any result in sports, and then they drink some kind of special brand of water, and suddenly they achieve all the successes, all the results in sports, and become super advanced, super successful sportsmen. I always say simplifying, but I'm sure you can think about these stories like this. So what are the benefits then? Why narrative advertisement and appealing to emotions is more effective, and what does it give to brands? Using stories in advertisements encourages a customer to evaluate a brand more favorably. It sparks warm feelings and emotions and encourage the customers suspend rational judgments when it comes to brands. And it also creates a link between a customer's self or identity and helps to form emotional connection between the customer and the brand. So imagine you see an amazing dress or a suit in a shop or in a video advertisement. It looks amazing. You've already imagined how amazing you're going to look in it at a party, that everyone's eyes are going to be drawn to you, that you are going to really impress everyone. So you've already connected this particular product in the advertisement with your future image, with part of yourself, because you see yourself and this product as a whole. And you get transported in this imaginary world or fantasy world where, again, you see how more amazing, how more exciting looking you are going to be in this particular dress or in this particular suit. And you're so excited about this feeling. You're so drawn into this fantasy that you may suspend your emotional judgment, such factors as maybe you have 50 other suits or dresses in your closet. Maybe you don't have enough money and you'll have to only eat pasta for the next few days to buy it. Maybe the fact that you will not be using this dress or this suit anymore apart from this one event. But nevertheless, you suspend all these arguments and you buy the trust because you have this fantasy in your hand, because you already connected yourself with the idea and with the product of this particular brand. So we could see that groups like ISIS, and ISIS was particularly prominent and successful in this, did or do use the same instrument in their propaganda. In my research, I was looking specifically at ISIS's magazines, Dabik and Rumiyaz. It was a few years ago when the group was on the rise and when they were really active disseminating their propaganda. And I identified 4 stories in their publications that could render the same meaning and the same purpose. The first one is Awakening and Finding the Path to the Caliphate. The second, Finding Mujahid's Glory. Third, Finding Female Destiny. And the fourth is Remaining and Expanding. So because we are limited in time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I would like to show you the ways how one of them is crafted just to give you an idea of the practicalities of this tool. So I'm going to focus on story number 2, Finding Mujahid's Glory, because, well, the major purpose of propaganda for ISIS, as for any other terrorist group, is to attract new fighters or new members. So this one is probably the most important among all of the stories. So like in every story, you have a protagonist. In this particular case, it's a young Muslim man who either lives in the West or he probably lives in the Middle East. But the most important part that he's suffering from being exposed to sinfulness, immorality, dealing with hypocrites, dealing with people who violate the rules of Islam, dealing with apathetic government. At the same time, this Muslim man, and this is always a man in this case, is of a very good nature. He's a kind person. He is a very devoted Muslim, what is the most important part. So he's really suffering in his current environment. The plot of this story is then rendering the following. And you could see the ways how these stories are phrased below my points, in case you're interested in specific examples. The plot of this story is developing in the following way. The protagonist, our young Muslim man, decides that to get yourself out of this suffering, get yourself out of this sinful environment, he has to migrate to the caliphate. And he does this, he becomes a mujahid or holy warrior, and he fights alongside other Islamic states fighters for Islam. Of course, he fights as a hero, he crushes all the enemies, he is really dedicating himself to that fight. But of course, there's always this one pesky enemy who is going to kill that particular heroic man. And if you look again at the descriptions in ISIS's propaganda, it is always a very dramatic text that renders this idea, that gives you this suspense and action to really keep you engaged and follow the story. And then usually the way how these stories end is that even though our character dies, he dies as a hero, as a devoted Muslim who sacrificed himself for the sake of Islam. For that, he's been rewarded by God by granting him paradise and eternal happiness. You could often see in the endings pictures of ISIS fighters after they got killed, and oppositely to usual ISIS's gruesome pictures, these are used not to scare people away, but to do the opposite, to show how that person died happily, and usually they have this smile and a very peaceful expression on their faces, again to create this impression that a person indeed was transitioning to a better place. So what do these stories offer? What is the product, quote unquote, that the ISIS brand is trying to, again, quote unquote, promote in this particular story or others? So you could notice that there are at least three. In my research, I named the fourth one, which is particularly relevant to women, but I'll skip it. You can look it up later if you are interested. But you can often find the idea that you get the feeling of exclusivity and specialness as a member of ISIS. What it means is that you're not just an ordinary person living in London or in Amman or anywhere else. You are a holy warrior. You are a hero. You are chosen by God to save your community, to save your country, to save your co-believers from a particular threat. So again, you leave your ordinary life and you get to this level where you feel like you are really someone special, chosen, extraordinary, different, and superior to other people. It is also about moral transformation. So even if you're not living a particularly successful or peace life in your current situation, ISIS says, well, go to join our group, go to the caliphate, and then you can become better, you can change, you can achieve this level of personal development that you're striving for. You can really become a better person. And it is also the feeling of superpower. And I'm sure most of you, if not all, saw some movies about superheroes, right? And it's often developed in the same way when you have this ordinary person who doesn't know that they are actually special, but then they gain the superpower and then they crush all their enemies. They completely change. They become so cool and exciting and amazing, and they live a completely different and better life. So you could see that these three offerings really help, again, to transfer people into this imaginary world of fantasy where they don't see themselves as they are, but they imagine themselves in this role of superhero, real men, lions, as ISIS would often refer to them, who are the saviors of the Muslim community, who are going to change the world. Through this fantasy, they establish emotional connection with the ISIS brand because they see this brand as the deliverer of this fantasy. Being part of ISIS is going to help you to achieve this fantasy, to make it true. By doing so, they also make it part of their membership of this in this group, becoming part of the group's of person's identity. And then they hold on to this fantasy so much that they tend to suspend their emotional judgment. And that's where the question of why, say, attempts to debunk ISIS's propaganda didn't work that well or not well as expected is because they ignored the truth or the narratives that are aiming to tell what the reality is of being part of this group, what they're doing. But the excitement of this, of living this fantasy, of transforming themselves in this imaginary character from the story is so high, so big, that they prefer to hold on to this excitement rather than coming back to the real world. So this is one of the instruments that groups may use, and it's, as I mentioned, particularly effective in the ways how groups connect with the audiences and how they maintain this connection, and often convince them not based on the ideas that they're trying to disseminate, but on these promises that a potential member gets from the interaction with recruiters and from consuming the group's propaganda. Another instrument of marketing that I would like to talk about is authenticity. And authenticity is helping brands to be perceived as something genuine, original, truthful, make audiences feel that brand cares about them, represents them. It also, similarly as storytelling, encourages and builds stronger emotional connection. And eventually it helps brands compete and win the competition against other brands. If you have similar brands with similar products, with similar ideas, you need to do something to connect with your target audience and encourage them to choose you as opposed to your competitor. Authenticity could be signaled through several instruments. It could be projecting the idea of naturalness or referring to naturalness. We represent true Russians. We represent true Muslims. So it's reference to the target audience's indigenous characteristics, something that is very close to their personality, something that represents the core of them. It is also originality, emphasizing your uniqueness and difference from other groups. And difference of your potential supporters from the rest of the audience. Exceptionality, similar to what we were talking about in the part about storytelling, an idea of being chosen by a supreme force for a special mission. Continuity, signaling the brand represents tradition and nostalgia and represents sometimes really the best ideas that people hold on to. And then influence is an ability to motivate other actors for actions and have impact on current events. You don't just promise, you don't just represent people, but you are able to deliver. You can fulfill your promises and you could really change the environment among you because you are so potent and powerful. So I'm just quickly going to show how this authenticity concept is being used by another group, which is called the Russian Imperial Movement, and probably the American audience here is familiar with this group better because it only became a terrorist group after the US and Canada recognized them as such. Before it was a very clandestine, not that important niche group that held very far-right views and believed in the idea of monarchy for Russia. However, they became much better known after this recognition and after their active involvement in the war in Ukraine. So they are, again, quite limited in their ideology, and they do not really resonate with Russian people's views on the government organization that much. People don't really see monarchy in this traditional sense of having an empire as a way to build the Russian state. However, they do get following and they do attract quite a good amount of people who are not just following them on social media, but also join their military wing and they go to fight in Ukraine. So the first narrative that they are signaling, as I mentioned, is naturalness. So they are talking about the fact that monarchy is inherent to Russian identity, true Russian identity. Orthodoxy, which is another strong element of their beliefs, is also inherent to true Russians. And they then represent these two main values. And if you are a true Russian, if you have strong beliefs in your national identity, then they are going to be representative of your views. And then they strengthen it further by using the external threats, Islam, liberalism, and even the Russian government itself as the carrier of completely contradictory beliefs. Originality. They are emphasizing the special way that Russian people have. They are emphasizing how unique Russians are. They are emphasizing that Russia has unique values that do not resonate with the rest of the world, and this is its advantage, and it really needs to go in its own way and shouldn't be following the trajectory of the rest of the world. If you share this idea, again, these are your people. They are the defenders of the Russian originality, Russian uniqueness, because this is what they fight for. Exceptionality. If you are part of this group, if you are supporting their ideas, and which is more, if you are joining their military wing, the Imperial Legion, you are chosen. You are a holy warrior. I guess you probably heard this term before, right? So just a few minutes ago, while I was talking about the Islamic State. So you could definitely see the similarities. You are real men. You are patriots. If you are part of this group, you are indeed the most mysterious, the most exquisite part of the population of Russia. You are different from anyone else. And therefore, you are special. You are better than others. Continuity. So they present themselves as heirs of the Russian Empire. If you are nostalgic about the glorious past, if you feel like Russia lost its influence, Russia lost its better days, there is a way to come back to this, and this is the empire. And RIM, Russian Imperial Movement, is going to bring it to this better past and replicate it in the present and in the future. And they're also, again, kind of using the concept of evil communist as, again, sparking this nostalgia and showing how the new government in Russia are also heirs of evil communists that ruined everything, that really turned the country backwards and destroy the influence and the glory that I used to have, which needs to be changed through them. And influence. Here they are referring to their charitable work. They show how they change the lives of people around them. They support, as far as I know, children in foster care. They help families who are struggling financially. They also talk about their influence abroad, and you could see some of the quotes here, which may sound like RIM is a little bit delusional, because I don't think Pope really listened to their opinions about gay rights and gay marriage, but nevertheless, they use these narratives in their propaganda. They also use the idea of terrorist designation, which happened in 2020, to their benefit as well, because they're trying to show that the West is so scared of them that they decided to designate them as terrorists to stop their influence and to stop their power being disseminated and spread out across the continent, to diminish the power of liberal values and diminish the influence of the West. So, what are the points to consider from looking into these two tools? So, the first thing is that even though terrorists do use disinformation and they do lie to their target audience, it may not necessarily be the reason for their success. one of the reasons, and by no means I argue that's the only reason, but one of the reasons why terrorist propaganda does resonate with the target audiences is not only what they say, but how they say it. And the techniques that are adopted from friends contribute to this success. The key to successful terrorist recruitment is the establishment of emotional connections and making the target audience suspend the rational judgment so that even if they are subjected to debunking of terrorist narratives, they are still holding on to their beliefs. When it comes to counter-terrorist efforts, they should probably be turned not just to counter the content of terrorist propaganda, which again is something that is a dominant approach in CT, but also, again, the ways how these ideologies, how the messages are being communicated to the audiences, and what is actually promised to the audience that are consuming the content. Is it really the ideology, or is it something else? And finally, which I hate to say, but I think unfortunately we have to do this, we do need to learn from the ways how terrorists recruit to adopt these strategies to our benefit and use them in crafting better and more sophisticated counterterrorism approaches to terrorist propaganda online. Thank you very much. This is all from my side. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have, and looking forward to it.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting and a lot to think about. And I have a few questions swimming through my head already. So I'll pose one and I'll open it up to our audience to continue to enter their questions into the chat as well. So I'll start with mine and then I'll get to our audience's questions. But my question for you is I guess related to in this presentation, you've referred to kind of how these tactics are used by terrorist groups. I'm curious as to whether you would imagine that these same strategies are used by, I would even say like government groups, like towards their kind of own organizations and sort of bits of pieces, and kind of how the same lessons can be applied, what we can learn from that, sort of what differences you may see in any research you've done.
Thank you, Hira. That's a great question. I think, and I'll make a disclaimer because I didn't take the same approach when I was at the state's propaganda, so I didn't really look at state's propaganda that much. But my feeling, yes, it may definitely be used by non-democratic states, let's put it that way, to encourage people for a certain type of action, right? We can take the war in Ukraine, and one of the things that I noticed when looking at the types of messages that are being disseminated online to encourage people to go and fight is kind of similar to what we can see in some of the elements of ISIS propaganda, in the way that, for example, ISIS used to use video games in their propaganda, as again, probably a lot of people know. And with the beginning of war, the government started using similar types of videos where they would show a person, a young man, playing a video game, and then it would be accompanied with a message, well, if you enjoy playing virtual battlefield, why not to go and enjoy this in real life and get the same kind of excitement? So I would assume there is nothing stopping the governments from using these methods, with the one more disclaimer that I think terrorist groups are much more agile and much more tech savvy when it comes to creation and dissemination of propaganda. I don't think governments in general are that quick in picking up on new tendencies, picking up on new trends in social media or technologies. So I think there's probably going to be a lag. But the fact that they are learning from terrorist groups is definitely true.
Thank you so much. And I'll start with the audience questions. Um, we've got one that just thanks you at the top and then asks, are there any ways to recognize if someone is being influenced by such groups?
I mean, if you look, I guess that's a whole discussion about how you identify whether a person is radicalized or not, right? And there are different opinions on that. My personal opinion is that it's really difficult to really say whether a person was radicalized or not, because of the fact that sometimes it happens as quick as, well, probably not overnight, but in a few days. So you can't really intervene in such a short period of time. And for some people, it's really a spontaneous decision. For that reason, I think it's really hard to spot these signs quickly. But if you look at the interviews that former ISIS members or former far-right groups members were given about their involvement in these groups, a lot of them would say, well, I don't really know why I joined, or I joined again overnight, or I just watched the videos and I liked them and I went. So you could see the signs post factum, you could see the signs that these techniques did have influence on person's psychic and person's decisions.
Thank you so much. And there's a very similar question, which sort of builds it and again looks at that sort of post moment of being able to identify that someone has been influenced. And this person asks, I'm wondering whether there's been any comparisons between terrorist propaganda and cults. It sounds like people who are programmed to join need to break through emotional connections, but they're all vulnerable people. Any knowledge on how we can help people deprogram?
Yeah, there is research, quite a good bulk of research that does compare terrorist organizations and cults. And again, I'm referring to ISIS a lot because it's kind of the field of my expertise, but ISIS was repeatedly compared to cults and the way how cults operate. Because you have this, again, feeling of meaning in life that you are being given, this emotional aspect, this connection that you have to your leader. So it's very, very similar. The ways how you can, well, hopefully, but of course there's no guarantee. Some of the things that are recommended to do is also similar to the ways how people are being extracted from cults. It's family intervention. It's the involvement of families, and in my other work on QAnon, I was conducting interviews with people who left the movement. And I think about 99% of them said that, well, if not my family, I would have probably stayed, but I felt how it affects them, how they're suffering, seeing me getting in this rabbit hole more and more. And they really, really helped me. My love for them helped me to get out. There is also a debate whether we should focus on kind of pure counterterrorism approaches, or we should also adopt public health approaches, helping with housing, helping with work placement, helping with financial situation. And when it comes to cults, there is an argument that, well, this may help a person to also get out and adopt a relatively or fully normal life. So there is an argument that the same approach may be effective for terrorism, but I guess there is no silver bullet, and I always tell my students that every single case of terrorist involvement is unique. And even though we do know a lot about terrorism, it's hard to generalize exactly for the reason that it is so unique and it is so individual for many people.
Our next question also delves into counterterrorism. This is from Ian Jenkins. And he says, you mentioned that we need to learn from these marketing methods from a counterterrorism perspective. Alex Schmidt and others have discussed the need to establish not a counter narrative, but an alternative narrative. In your opinion, how close are the EU, the UK, and the US in counterterrorism terms to successfully creating this alternative narrative? Are we getting it done? And just for the audience, maybe if you could expand on sort of what that means also as an alternative narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, I'm happy that I got this question because I really like talking about counter narratives and alternative narratives. And the general approach that the EU, the US adopted since the emergence of ISIS was counter narratives. And counter narratives are dealing with the necessity to respond to terrorist propaganda, to show how, well, it sounds very basic, how bad terrorists are. It's been done. You know, in America, Hans Beckert and Ahmed Yale were successfully using the project. They launched the project Breaking the ISIS Brand, where they would record the interviews with ISIS defectors and they would brand them as ISIS propaganda, then disseminate online, and then they reported there is indeed an effect. But this is a kind of more researchers, individuals initiative, which did have quite a good effect. When it comes from the government themselves, it's much more problematic because, well, if a person got to the point where they left their country and joined the terrorist group, they probably don't trust the government much. So whatever information, whatever narratives coming from the government is they're not going to be well received and is not going to be believed that well. And the specific examples, again, the US government initiatives think again to in a way when the US was trying to show again how ISIS is lying, how ISIS was trying to create the utopian state which doesn't really exist, and there is no happiness for Muslims, there is no freedom of religion, there is nothing that they're promoting there. Similarly, in the UK, there was an initiative, UK against Daesh, which would publish a statement by ISIS saying everyone who comes here has food 3 times a day, and then the creators of this account would say, well, actually people are starving there. The problem with these counter narratives, and I think Alexander Melgrew Hitchens has a paper on this, is that it approaches the response from the negative perspective. You're not saying, you're basically just saying how, as I said, how bad terrorists are, but you're not offering an alternative. What, okay, if not this, then what? If a person is already angry, if a person is already looking for something else that they can't get in their normal life. Alternative narratives are the approach where you're focusing on the positives. How we, as the West, as the UK, the US, and anyone else, could win in this competition. What could we present as our, if you will, in marketing terms, competitive advantages to the terrorist propaganda? And it's, you know, freedom of religion. You can practice whatever you want. You are respected. You are safe. You are, I don't know, you have a certain level of financial stability. So it is believed that this is a more successful approach. As far as I know, there hasn't been done as much in this aspect. I know that there are discussions and there are initiatives in regards to this approach, and hopefully they will be implemented soon. We'll see, but well, probably if they are implemented, we won't know that much because obviously you will be disseminating them across potential target audiences a bit more covertly rather than overtly.
Thanks so much. We've got two last ones I think we can cover in the time we have. The next question is from Nur Al Nasser, who asks, what do you think the current events with war between Israel and Hamas affect alternative narratives that have been adopted by Western governments? And do you see a spike in radicalization? And how do you think it will or can be contained?
Well, I think definitely if alternative narratives are being created, again, I can't really speak for the European or US governments, but if they are, I think unfortunately the reaction that Western governments have at the moment, which is basically inaction, would not contribute to the successful creation of those narratives, because again, the tragedy of Gaza, the tragedy of millions of people being killed there with silent, well, if not approval, but absence of any action from the Western side, is not going to strengthen any attempt to de-radicalize or respond to propaganda that is being disseminated by terrorist groups. And of course, I mean, once the war started, the level of terrorist threat was raised across Europe significantly, because you will find people who are feeling victimized by looking at what's happening in Gaza. And you could see that this is already happening. There were instances in Switzerland, I think. Well, you just witnessed the terrorist attack in Russia. That is probably also partially influenced by what's happening in between Israel and Hamas and Gaza. So I think my answer is simple here. It's not going to contribute in any positive way to attempts to respond to terrorist narratives.
Thanks so much for that. Our last one from our audience for today is a two-part question. So they start by thanking you for your insightful presentation. They're curious about how some states' authorities' dissemination of propaganda in times of military coups, and your views on such situations. And the second part of their question is, how can the international community deter the dissemination of terrorist disinformation and propaganda?
I'll be struggling to talk about the use of these methods in the times of coups, because it's not really my field of expertise, and I didn't really look into this question at all, I should say, unfortunately. But it's an extremely interesting angle. I think it would be really interesting to see indeed whether there is any kind of connection. In terms of the response to disinformation, I guess also I won't be original here. One of the ways how to respond to disinformation is education or inoculation. And I would recommend, if you are interested to know more about the inoculation concept, to read works by Kurt Braddock, who I think was or is one of the major advocates for this method, where you expose people to pieces of propaganda and you educate them about how it works, what it is trying to achieve, how it is connecting with their target audiences. By doing so, you prepare people to be vigilant, if you will, so that when they encounter these pieces of propaganda later, they are already informed, they are already knowledgeable enough to dismiss these particular pieces. Education in general about technologies, about the ways how now we can use artificial intelligence to create propaganda, how you could use deepfakes to create videos and images that never existed, is also important, just again to raise people's awareness and not trust everything they see online or elsewhere easily.
Thanks so much to all the audience for their questions. Thanks so much, Dr. Kruglova, for your time, for your presentation, for something very interesting that perhaps helps us understand people a little bit better and helps kind of inform how we move forward as well and how we communicate with each other. So thank you so much for being part of the series. I've put the link in the chat for anybody who's interested in joining sort of the remainder of sessions we have. We have a talk tomorrow at noon in Eastern Time, which is with Nicole Carreri from the Department of Religion at Boston University. Her presentation is called Coercive Control at the Micro and Macro Levels. So you can access the registration for that and sort of the remaining, I believe we have 5 left for this semester, talks through that link as well. Thank you so much again for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we hope we see you at another event. And again, thank you, Dr. Kruglova.
Thank you so much, Hira, for inviting me again. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing questions.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.